We're going to try this one more time. Hello, welcome back. It is I, Anthony Mueller, the Wine Advocate Reviewer for South Africa and Washington State. We have a very talented winemaker who will be joining us momentarily. There he is. Fantastic. I hope everyone is having a fantastic... It is looking literally like Mars here in Napa. Orange skies, very eerie, very crazy day. There he is. Hello, sir.
What's up, buddy?
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Sorry about that.
That's all right. It happens. It's all part of 2020, really. It's all out to kill us. So.
100%. 100%.
Please welcome Trey Busch of Sleight and Cellars. Trey, thank you so much for joining me today. I know that we are in harvest season, and you were in the vineyards this morning at 9 a.m., getting busy, getting all the things done. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy day with such a crazy year going on. So for the viewers out there that aren't necessarily familiar with you or your brand, can you please give a quick background and kind of bio about yourself and the winery?
Sure. Yeah, you bet. So I'm Trey Busch, and I'm one of the founding partners with Sleight of Hand. Founded the winery in 2007 with my good friend Jerry Solomon and his wife Sandy. Prior to that, I was the winemaker for a small property up here called Cellars. Did that for 5 years. But I got my start in the wine business working for Dunham up here in Walla Walla. Eric Dunham hired me in 2000. I came from the retail clothing background. I was a buyer for Nordstrom, and started visiting Walla Walla to visit a friend who was living down here, and fell in love with the area. I got to meet Eric. He and I became great friends, and that just turned into a job opportunity. He asked me if I'd come work for him, and I had a kind of a marketing and sales background, but he was, a winemaker by nature, and it was a good fit for the two of us. And so under his tutelage, I learned how to make wine, figured some other things out on my own at Basil, and then when we started the winery, started Sleight of Hand in 07, we've just been on an uphill trajectory ever since. We make about 10,000 cases now between roughly 10 different wines. We'll be tasting a couple of those today. And we source fruit from Walla Walla, Red Mountain, Yakima Valley, and the Horse Heaven Hills, as well as we do some Riesling out of the Ancient Lakes area.
Oh, awesome. Fantastic. So first things first, how are you doing in 2020? It's been a rough ride for a lot of people.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it hasn't necessarily been too kind to the wine industry and wine tourism as a whole.
Yeah. I honestly haven't looked forward to a harvest like this in a long time. It's the one shining light at the end of the tunnel as we sort of entered through March and April, and everything started happening as the growing season was progressing, and it's been a really great vintage in Washington. As we've gotten closer and closer, it's really been something that we can look forward to, because it seems like there's just not a lot to look forward to these days. And so 2020 has been okay with us. Retail's been fine. We've got an amazing wine club, and they have been very supportive through all of this. Yeah, I mean, so we're still standing. We're still fully employed. We've got all of our employees, and we self-distribute in King County, which is Seattle and Bellevue.
Sure.
And I've got a sales team of 2 people, plus a driver. Plus we've got a full-time tasting room over there as well, which we've somehow managed to keep that open through all of this. And our tasting room in Walla Walla has been open too. So we have done what everybody else I think has done, and that is you need to do what you need to do to make it work.
For sure. Yeah, very wise words. And I think 2020 has forced people to pivot to make things work, because
that's going to be the key word, I think, for businesses. And I use that word a lot. And we haven't necessarily made adjustments on the winery side, but certainly on the sales side, we have been very aggressive in putting our brand out there, not only through our mailing list and our wine club, but just through the retail channels that we're working with as well. So, but everything else about 2020 can go suck it. So
right, for sure. Not impressed. 0 stars. Return to sender. Absolutely.
Right.
So where are you in terms of 2020 harvest? You've got some grapes in.
We started last week. And this is whatever normal it is in Washington these days, but we picked Chardonnay on Wednesday last week. We picked a little Merlot on Friday last week, and we picked a little Merlot today. We've got our Rosé in the door as well. But the Chardonnay is from Yakima Valley, vineyard called French Creek, 40-year-old Chardonnay vineyard, Winty clone. And it's really, really beautiful fruit. And the Rosé is Cabernet Franc, and that came from Yakima Valley as well, not even 2 miles from French Creek. And Red Mountain, which is a very warm area for Washington State, as you know, that's where our Merlot has been picked off. We have Merlot in Walla Walla, and I'll bet we won't pick that until the end of the month. Just to give you an idea about Walla Walla versus Red Mountain and the differences in the growing regions. People think of Walla Walla as warm, and we have some warm areas, but our little valley has a lot of microclimates that even within our valley, I've got sites that pick off 3 to 4 weeks different, same varietal.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's one thing that's always struck me as familiar growing up in Phoenix, where it does have the tendency to have very warm days, but there are microclimates where you get a pretty gnarly diurnal shift where it might be 105, 110, but it's going to cool down to easily the 70s.
Well, we got down earlier this week, maybe it was Saturday or Sunday, it was 101.
Yeah.
And it went down to 50.
Yeah.
So, and it's a 50-degree swing in a day, right? And so, but those, we talk about this a lot in Washington, and I know you hear that from everybody who talks to you from Washington, but we do have a very big diurnal shift here, and that helps preserve our acidity. And I think that's one of the reasons we make these beautifully balanced wines. They're ripe, but they're still balanced.
For sure. Yeah, I think it must have been, I think it was Sunday, because there was the day in Napa where it was 113 and it's down to like 66 or something. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, that's just so gross. Well, we recorded our first, we had a 31-degree temperature in Touchy here in the valley this morning. So when I was driving through at 6:15 in the morning, I was gassing up in Touchy, and I got out of the car, and I just had a t-shirt on and jeans, and I was, sort of hit with it, because at my house it was 45 degrees.
Yeah. And
this is 15 miles away.
Yeah.
So thankfully there aren't any grapes down there. It's not a great place for growing grapes. It's the lowest part of the valley, and not a great place for growing grapes over there.
Cool. So I know that this past weekend and beginning of the week, I think it was Monday, there's some crazy dust storms from the wheat fields from eastern Washington that kicked up. Also a little bit of smoke from other fires, Canada and elsewhere. A lot of crazy things. Has this affected your winery at all?
No, it certainly affected the air quality, but these fires are so far away. We had a shift in winds. Normally our weather comes in from the southwest.
Yeah. It'll
come up through the Columbia Gorge from Portland, from the, off the coast, and kind of roll in.
Yeah.
These winds were coming from the northeast and from a system that was over Montana. Mm-hmm. And, wheat harvest is just finished up. Yeah. And so you've got about 100 miles from Walla Walla up to I-90 of nothing but wheat fields. Yeah. And the Palouse, and that's the Palouse. And so we had 45, 50 mile an hour gusts, and it was like a haboob, if you know what that is. It's just massive. I mean, you've seen it.
Yeah,
in Arizona.
And it was in monsoon for sure.
Yeah, it happened twice. We had two different waves of this wind and sand and dust come through, along with the smoke from the fires near Spokane and stuff. And then the wind shifted to the east the next day, and it cleared out, and it was absolutely beautiful. But the closest fire to us right now, I think, is the Evans Canyon fire, which is north of Yakima, the city of Yakima, and it's a ways off. So
yeah, it's pretty crazy. I saw all those fires starting to happen. It just exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, you saw the Willamette Valley the past 2 days. If you're going to check out a great Instagram page for photos,
Yeah.
Josh Bergstrom,
Yeah.
posted some pictures yesterday that it looked like the apocalypse happening.
Yeah.
In the country.
Yeah. People were being airlifted. The military was putting people in helicopters because they closed down I-5,
Right.
Medford, Ashland area, and it was just fire on both sides of the freeway. Disaster.
That's just incredible.
My heart goes out to those people. It's just
Yeah. Hopefully this is not the new normal. I'll tell you that.
if it is, man, I don't know. Yeah. So a little more inspiring questions now, not so gloomy. You are a lover of music, and
I am.
Looking around your your back wall there, I can see a lot of familiar pictures and things from my past as well.
Yeah.
Since it's been music has been a constant inspiration for you, what lasting contribution has the music and your passion for music left on your art skill for making wine and the brand itself?
Well, I don't know how much it has to do with winemaking for us, but I can tell you from a branding standpoint and just for my sanity, that music has gotten me through a lot of stuff. And for as long as I can remember, that's been my crutch to fall back on. And we at Sleight of Hand, our motto is we make punk rock wines for punk rock minds. And it does fall a little bit into our winemaking style as well. I think that we've tried to evolve over the years since we started the winery to today. We've seen a huge seismic shift in the style of wines we were making in the beginning and what we're doing now, and also as we look forward, and that the inspiration to look forward. And so that might be the punk rock aesthetic that has sort of made us look to new and adventuresome places to go plant grapes and to go work with places that no one would think about working with before. From a branding standpoint, it's been very interesting because when Jerry and I started the winery back in 2007, we had a tiny little tasting room in downtown Walla Walla. It was 800 square feet. And at the time, I've got a 22-year-old and a 14-year-old, but my 14-year-old was, just turning 1 and just learning how to walk. And I had a turntable, my turntable set up in my living room at home. And Chloe would walk and, these little grabby hands. Yeah. And I'm like, this is not really a great place for the turntable. I got to get out of here. So I took it to my office. And I say the office, I put it in the tasting room in downtown Walla Walla. And between Jerry and I, we probably had 100 albums at the time. But 14 years ago, vinyl was not where it's at today. Today, vinyl is just huge. I mean, it's a huge resurgence. Yeah. And so it was a novelty for sure back then. And people would come in the tasting room and, they'd hear the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Pearl Jam or, Aretha Franklin, whatever we were playing. And they would get a kick out of seeing the turntable. Mm-hmm. And initially, the very first thing we would talk about would be music. Yeah. And what I found was that, wine can be intimidating. I know you see that all the time, especially in your somm days, when you go to a table and they're looking at you with these wide open eyes because they have no idea if they're going to ask a stupid question. And we always say there's no stupid questions, but they don't know that. They think that, And I think wine has this factor like that. And I found that when people walk into a tasting room and we'd be talking about music, it would sort of put them at ease a little bit. And then we could just sort of talk about the wines, right? Yeah. If anything, they could say, oh my God, you have Fleetwood Mac. Can you play Fleetwood Mac or whatever, right? So now their frame of mind has changed a little bit. And I think that people are more receptive when they're in a good spot like that. And, we take our winemaking very seriously. Our goal is to make the best wines in Washington State. That's our goal. But we don't take ourselves seriously, and that is seen when you come into our tasting room and you see Pearl Jam posters everywhere, which is my favorite band. And you see we've got 3,000 albums now in the other room. And so when people come in and see that stuff, even though we've moved locations, we left that place after 4 years and built the winery that we're at now. But it's kind of still it still feels the same when new people walk in. Their eyes get big, and you know that when they get back home, no matter where they live, and they say, "Oh, who'd you guys visit that was, fun and different and whatever?" Well, we're for sure going to come up from there. So,
For sure. Awesome.
yeah,
I believe that music is the great communicator.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yes.
And wine makes conversations better. Speaking of which, I think we should enjoy some because
we got to do that. Yeah.
That is that time. So we're going to start off with the 2018 Psychedelic Sierra.
Yeah. And
Speaking
this is a brand new release, Anthony.
Yes, sir.
This wine is from our estate vineyard, which is located in a sub-AVA of the Walla Walla Valley called the Rocks District of Milton Free Water. It is one of, if not the, I think most identifiable AVA in North America, at least when it comes to Syrah. And I don't say that lightly because there's a lot of great Syrah growing around the world and around the country. But when you smell a wine from the rocks, it's very hard to forget that. And it doesn't matter the producer. The terroir is so strong down there that there are all of these signature themes that come out of that area. I think winemakers can coax certain things out, maybe amplify them a little bit with their winemaking. But the underlying story is that this is an incredible place to grow grapes. And so this is 100% Syrah. This vintage was just over 50% whole cluster, foot crushed. We're 100% native at the winery, or non-inoculated. I use the term native lightly, but we're non-inoculated. So whatever yeast live in the vineyard, whatever yeast live in the winery, that's what's doing our ferments for us. And this wine sees between 20 and 25% new wood every year. I think this is 25% new French oak, a 500-liter large format puncheons. You've had a lot of experience in the past couple of years drinking wines off the rocks, and I don't know if you agree with my earlier statement or not.
I would absolutely say that that the rocks or the stones, as some people call, in Walla Walla, it has a clear sense of place. When you try it, you know exactly where it's from. And I always point towards Walla Walla in general for people who are traveling from one style to another. From if you like a kind of older, generous kind of California style Syrah, and you want to start to kind of meander towards Northern Rhone, the natural path is to go through Walla Walla and understand that. I feel like it kind of pumps the brakes a little bit, and it kind of slows down into that kind of more mineral tension that you will absolutely get from the Northern Rhone. And conversely, if someone is a old world drinker and they want to get to understand big, generous Syrahs coming through Walla Walla first on their way down to California,
right? It's
the natural progression. There is clearly a sense of place when you try these wines. You know that it's New World, but there's this minerality that it's really hard to get. I don't think I've ever experienced this much minerality in a California Syrah. It just has this rusticness, but it's so pretty, polished, and beautiful at the same time. But it still has this shine that is clearly New World and 100% Washington. It's like you get this expression that is just uniquely, Pacific Northwest. It's really, really beautiful stuff.
Right. These wines are high pH wines, but they still have some great natural acidity. And the combo of those two things, I think, really makes a unique wine because it does have this very generous, full, rich mouthfeel texturally, but then you still can feel the presence of the acidity, along with all the blue and purple fruits, and then you've got the olive, and you've got sometimes you hear iodine, sometimes there's the funk that you hear a lot. The rocks funk or the stones funk, but the umami characteristics, very, very complex wines, and we don't make a lot of single vineyard wines here. I say that our Riesling is single vineyard, our Chardonnay is single vineyard, and we do a couple of single vineyard Syrahs. But the only reason we'll do them is if they can provide the complexity that we're looking for a finished wine. You know, if it has a hole somewhere in it, then it doesn't really fit into that model. But if it is its own thing and it's a complete wine, then we'll do that.
Yeah, the one thing I like about these wines is the expression. You get like this beautiful floral lifted expression with this bright fruit that's like high toned, not necessarily generous where it's like kind of jammy and juicy, but it's bright, lifted, energetic. You taste it, it has this energizing acidity that just makes your mouth water, and then you get almost like this soft tongue depressor of like rock and minerality. This kind of sits and adds almost like a nice texture across the mid palate.
And it doesn't make sense that 4.1 pH wine has what you say, use the word energy, right? And I make sure my phone was plugged in. It doesn't make sense that a wine with such a high pH would feel as bright as it does, and it's an anomaly. I always laugh. I'm like, well, if you take this and show this to Carol Meredith at Lagier Meredith, UC Davis professor, right? Incredible winemaking team, her and her husband Steve. And you said, oh, look at the chemistry on this. This is the natural chemistry on it. We didn't add acid, we didn't add water, blah, blah, blah. The numbers do not correlate in any way, shape, or form.
The expression.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting thing to taste and experience, because it kind of takes you on a ride. It kind of like goes up like this and then kind of zips back up and then it just coasts for like a really, 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 really long time. And it has a really long finish. And right now I'm still salivating. I can feel it. I can feel my salivary glands still producing. It's a wonderful, elegant, rich, juicy, fresh wine that just gives a lot of pleasure. It's really great.
And this is the 18 vintage. Was an incredible vintage for us here in Washington. It was a great summer. We had, in my 20 years of winemaking, the greatest harvest of 2 months of harvest in September and October. The most beautiful fall I can ever remember. And it was not only beautiful visually, because we had this very slow, gradual, where the leaves change and you can really watch it happening. Yeah. A lot of times we'll have, like last year, we had an October 10th, 22-degree freeze that stopped everything. It was just it, right?
19.
That's not uncommon for us up here in Washington. But this thing lasted all the way through November. And these grapes we typically pick middle to end of September. I've already scheduled. We have 3 blocks at a Stony Vine, and we own Stony Vine with Dusted Valley. So if you guys are familiar with Dusted Valley Winery, they're our partners in the vineyard, and they make incredible single vineyard wine off the Stony Vine as well. We sell to a lot of great winemakers. Our friend Jeff Lindsay Thorson makes 100% Syrah off of this. He has WT Vintners, Vapiano, another producer up here at Walla Walla. I know we have 5 or 6 different producers that make wines off this vineyard. We make between 500 and 600 cases in a normal year of this wine. In 2017, we had a freeze that winter. We made 75 cases of wine off of our 2.5 acre block that we work with. And so it's a warm area in the summer, but it is very cold in the wintertime. And Mother Nature is especially up here, it's one of the things we live with is hard winters. And it seems like every 5-6 years you're going to get a freeze.
Sounds about right. I really enjoyed the savoriness, like that kind of umami, olivey. It has like the epitome of what Syrah is. It has all those classic expressions. That kind of cracked pepper, the
roasted meat.
I get more like summer sausage that's been singed slightly.
Okay.
After it's been aged for about 45 days. But you still got like this.
I need your palate, buddy.
Well, I gotta go from Wisconsin, so summer sausage is the thing there. It's real. Yeah, cheese and summer sausage and beer. But it has those high tone florals that it takes red fruit and it pushes them into not quite the black fruit portion, right, but the dark red expressions, like the dark cherry and the dark plum. Right. All those things.
Yeah, I get a lot of plum, and I get a lot of those dark, like black cherries out of that area in general. Yeah. I've always joked that, and especially when these wines age, the big funkiness on the young versions of these goes away, and some of those fruit qualities do come out. But when these wines initially are first popped open, and I've had certain vintages that it's really been apparent, it takes you like 7 or 8 descriptors before you even get to fruit. It's all savory the whole way through, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, and there's some plum in there, or there's some black cherry or whatever. So
that's good.
One of the hallmarks of the area. We bottle this wine typically in February or March, so it's 15, 16 months in barrel, and again, large format barrels have a lower impact on the final wine, and that's our goal. As winemakers here at Sleight of Hand, our goal is to, have a low impact on what you end up with a bottle. We think that all the work was really already done in the vineyard and by the vintage, and we try to be transparent. We want you to taste the vintage differences. In Washington, I don't think we have a huge variation, but
if you talk about 15, 16, 17, 18.
Well, yes, and you're talking. I mean, you go back to 13 through 16. I mean, those were hot vintages. And then 17, you had the smoke, and then 18 was perfect, and 19 and 19
just like what? Yeah, and then here we are in 2020.
2020 is going to be wine of the century, vintage of the century.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Knock on the wood. Right now.
Yeah. So far, so good.
Right. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So let's switch gears. Let's go to the Reserve Cabernet.
Yeah.
The 2016 Illusionists. Beautiful, beautiful Cabernet here. You have some of the most unique labels.
We think so. Yeah. I'll talk on those. Let's talk about the wine first, and we'll jump into the labels after that.
For sure. Awesome.
The Illusionist is our Reserve Cabernet, and with the 16 vintage, we actually did a label change to a little more serious format, and that's what we just showed you. Yeah. The other labels that we have are a little more playful. They play on the old vintage magic thing. Yes. But this really has always been our reserve wine, and these essentially what we deem as reserve is these are our best barrels from our best lots from the vintage, and starting in 12 or 13, we were mostly estate fruit, and with the 16 and the Illusionist and the Archimage, we're 100% estate off our 3 main Bordeaux estate vineyards, and that's Blue Mountain Vineyard right here in Walla Walla, which is the vineyard land is owned by Corliss, but we have an 8-acre estate block they planted for us that we've got a long-term lease on. Same thing on Red Mountain, and we've got a 5-acre block in Horse 7 Hills. So 3 main, I think the best places to grow Bordeaux varietals in Washington, and we have our flag planted in all 3 of those areas with the idea, and this really goes back to my days at Dunham working with Eric. Eric was a very artistic winemaker and was not a science-based winemaker. He never did things based off of, let's pick because the sugar's here and the acids are here. Let's adjust the acid to do this. Yeah. Eric did things by feel, and when he blended the same way, and he always used 4 or 5 different vineyards to put a Cabernet together. And although we don't use quite as many vineyards, we still believe that some of the things you get from the Horse 7 Hills, you just don't have in Walla Walla. And same thing in Walla Walla and same thing in Red Mountain. And we can build complexity by utilizing the 3 sites rather than relying on, going back to what I said earlier, if it's not a complete wine on its own, or if I can make a better wine by blending 3 vineyards, then we're going to do that. And this is mostly Cabernet, 88 Cab, 9 Cab Franc, and there's a little bit of Petit Bordeaux in it as well. And we're in that 65% new French oak range, 20 to 22 months in barrel for this wine. I believe this was bottled in June of 18. So it would have been 20 months in barrel.
Awesome. Yeah, the you can clearly get the oak on the nose, but it's not overdone. It's integrated really well into the expression. You have the epitome of what Cabernet is, those juicier dark fruit. You have that kiss of pyrazinic note, that kind of sage, that soft green.
Yeah, we love that, by the way. We will pick Cabernet and Cabernet Franc a little earlier in some of our blocks to trap some of those pyrazines to use the blending tool, because I mean, honestly, you know, I think in the past 20 years, I think wines have gone away from that. Yeah. They've just gotten riper and riper and riper. And you just burn right through that, you know, that green note. You can say bell pepper or pyrazine, whatever it is, but that green note. But I like that in a small way. And I think it harkens back to, you know, the 80s and 90s Napa Cabernet, and certainly Bordeaux in almost all vintages, you know, with the exception of some very, very modern producers over there. But we because we grow wine in a desert, we can easily ripen past that. Yeah. But like I said earlier, we really enjoy that, and I think that it adds complexity.
For sure. I'm a fan of letting the grape speak for itself, and sometimes people forget that Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc have pyrazine compounds with them. It's part of their profile. And when you start to push a grape too far, you start to lose, I think, a touch of its sincerity. That's not to say that I dislike big, generous, juicy cabs that have no pyrazine, because you have to look at the wine. Right. But I find more sincerity and more pleasure having just that kiss, just that small little green aspect. It's like a highlight. It should be part of it. Yeah. Part of the expression, and you've captured here. It's not green bell pepper in your face like you know, like some Chilean Cabernets that
right. Carmenieres.
Yeah. Nowhere near there. Nowhere near there. But it still has everything that I am looking for in Cabernet, and you still have that dusty kind of minerality across the mid palate that's really, really delicious, and it's a fresh, lush wine that has your classic fruit profiles with that slight green edge, just a lifted complexity, and very balanced structure, good tannins. I'm literally right now just daydreaming of a seared steak. I would right now just peppered steak. That's what I want for lunch.
Well, we work on, you know, tannin management is important for us. You know, we are not trying to make the biggest, oakiest wines in Washington State. We look for elegance and balance. We want generous fruit. We want good tannin, but we want this tannin to be long and lengthy rather than, you know, chunky and need time to resolve. We do a pretty long bottle age. We're about a year and a half in bottle before we release to our wine club. And then we'll actually put it out to the general public and to our tasting room and into the market after 2 years in bottle. And that certainly helps, you know, things sort of settle down a little bit. And I think the wines are in a better place for it too. But we also are trying to make wines that age for 20 or 25 years. And, you know, going back and looking at some of our early efforts, and when we were stylistically making wines a little differently, mostly on our oak program, we were also using, we were also inoculating almost all those lots back then, where we moved really to all native now, or non-inoculated. And so, but those stylistic choices, those wines still, the 07s are drinking like champs right now. They're 13 years old, and they have at least a decade left. And so, you know, we think, well, I think Washington's, these wines definitely have the ability to age for a long, long time. And there's certainly producers in the state that have proven that way before I was there, with, Quilceda and, Leonetti and Woodward and Lacole and all those guys. Seven Hills coming to mind. Casey's wines from the 80s and 90s are still very, very good. So,
yeah. Wine, I mean, it's still young. I mean, this is the 18 is about to be released or is released?
So this is the 16.
Correct, but the
17 just got released to Wine Club back in the spring, and we'll release the 17 this fall.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So this, I mean, in relative terms, I'm just looking at it like the way I want to like gravitate towards food with this. You could probably rewind the tape and see me like I find myself chewing this wine where I'm like doing this. Like I want food with this now. That tells me that it has the tannin and the structure and all of the body and balance to put in the cellar and forget about for a decade. If you can be patient, do that, and then just pull it out. I like to see this really in year 20.
I feel like the tannins are they're generously coated in fruit.
Yeah, exactly.
And, but you still feel their presence.
Yeah, but it's not overbearing. It's not like Barolo tannin or Bordeaux tannin, but they're there. They're holding. I feel like the tannins are kind of holding everything together because there's a lot of stuff going on. The tannins are kind of holding it all together, and that is going to aid in its longevity.
Right.
For aging potential there. But right now they appear to be slightly elevated just because it's still a very young wine. Right. And this is why I want food with this because I want something with some fat in it. Exactly. Yeah. And so something because there are I think it's the proteins in meat that molecularly bind to tannins in wine. So it's like they cover each other and they minimize each other, and that's why certain wine pairing.
Like the natural pairing.
Exactly. Yeah. Really beautiful stuff. So we've had a really beautiful Syrah, really beautiful Reserve Cab. You make a nice kind of a variety of different bottlings. You work with a lot of different varietals.
Right.
Which do you prefer to work with, the Bordeaux varietals or the Rhone varietals? And what gives you more pleasure to work with?
Yeah, I enjoy working with all of them, and but I would say that I probably get more enjoyment out of working with Syrah in Washington because we work with so many different vineyard sites, and they're so different that being able to really get the expression of site. And in Syrah, we don't really grow Pinot up in Washington. There's not a lot of it up here. And so when you talk about terroir, a lot of people refer to Burgundy as the ultimate, Pinot is the ultimate terroir grape. I think Syrah is, and in Washington for us, it's definitely that way. And so we work with we work at 5 different Syrah sites. And to work with them individually on their own, and some of them come together in a blend, but some of them stay off on their own as well. I enjoy seeing how different that grape expresses itself based on site. And, there are certainly differences in Cabernet in Washington. They're just not as amplified. Syrah, the differences are amplified based on where it's grown in the growing season. And certainly things you do in the winery too, your choice to use whole cluster or no whole cluster, and things like that. But I probably enjoy working with Syrah more than anything.
Yeah, I concur what you said about Syrah having a greater diversity of expression throughout Washington, where if you look, Cabernet is still the most planted varietal on the planet and still the most planted red varietal in Washington, but Syrah holds so much potential along with the other Rhone varietals. And just being able to have Syrah from the rocks, Syrah from Walla Walla, Syrah from Yakima.
We've got
all over Columbia Valley.
And we've got the new site, our Ziggy Stardust block up at Elevation Vineyard. Yeah, that is past Christoph's Ore Category Vineyard. And Christoph was the first one to plant in the rocks, stones, and he was the first to plant up the North Fork. And he's a pioneer in that way. And so we're fortunate that there's only one other vineyard up there, the North Fork elevation, and we have about 1.5 acres Syrah up there. It's meter by meter. It's planted at a 45-degree slope. Yep. There's no machinery in that vineyard. It's 100% done by hand. Yeah. And it makes, in my opinion, it tastes, and it's, 6 miles from the rocks. It could be from another country. Mm-hmm. It doesn't taste anything like what you think Washington Syrah is. It really is its own thing. And I know you've had the Ore category wine, and it's a remarkable wine. For sure. I don't know how Christoph is able to coax that expression out of such young vines, but he does, and it's literally nothing short of magic. Literally. Yeah, Syrah is of all the varietals, I think it shows best young. Not shows best. It shows better than other varietals at a young age. Grenache takes 10 years before you even want to bottle it on its own. For sure. But Syrah, I've worked with second leaf Syrah. Second leaf, planted the year before, next year up on the vine with a crop, and mind-blowing stuff. It's insane. It's very exciting to see where Washington is headed as far as discovering new plots. I mean, there was the Royal Slope AVA just got announced last week. Yeah, which is great. So it's continually evolving, continually changing, and people are finding new places to plant and discover what happens when you plant a certain varietal at a certain place where no one else has thought to. You end up getting magic. So it's really, really cool stuff. And I will say that I think that Syrah is the most flexible in that, I've tasted Syrah picked at 22 bricks, and I've tasted it 28 bricks. And it's enjoyable everywhere in between. And so that grape has a lot of flexibility. I don't know if I'd want to taste 22 brick Cabernet, or even 28 brick Cabernet for that matter. But Syrah just seems to have this range that it does well in. And so you're seeing people push higher and higher elevations. We're working with Weather Eye Vineyard, and we have Grenache for Sleight of Hand that we're working with. Keith, our production winemaker, is working with Graciano and Mourvèdre on the backside of that vineyard on Weather Eye. And so Ryan Johnson, the great grower. And that's a very, very exciting new project. But the Columbia Valley is so big, and there is so much untapped potential here in Washington. And, I think with the fires in Napa and Sonoma, there might be some winemakers driving up this way sooner than later looking for a new place to grow grapes. Well, with the way Napa has been this year, I've heard of more than a few stories of curious winemakers trying to recover some of their potential losses for 2020. But yeah, I think looking at global warming and climate change, it's going to be a serious endeavor, because there are fortunes at stake, and you can't continue to suffer a loss like this year after year after year. Right. Or 2 times every decade. It's not feasible. But it's been amplified the past 5 years, in my opinion. It really feels like, not just in that, up here too. We dealt with huge fires in 2017 that affected the vintage, not from a smoke taint standpoint, but the heat. We had high elevation smoke for a month up in the sky, and UV radiation was cut down dramatically, and the ripening profile of what would have been a normal harvest was completely changed because of that. And, we're not immune to it up here in Washington. You guys have the spotlight on you down there for sure. I have a lot of friends who tease me. I moved to Napa in 2014, and they said, you brought all of this crazy heat with you. You should go back. You should go back where you came from. So
I see you being very active on social media. It seems like every week or so I turn on Instagram and you're walking through a vineyard. You're talking about vineyards and going into detail. What are the defining factors that you look for when looking at potentially planting new vineyards?
Well, that's interesting. I was fortunate enough, we started the winery in '07 to have worked for 2 other wineries prior to that. And those 7 years was able to, get a grasp of what not only each AVA was, but sort of dive down into vineyards. And then on top of it, you're also friends with all these other winemakers and you're tasting their wines from their vineyards. And to give an example, in 2009, when our next door neighbor, Rich Funk, is Savaya, he had just planted in 2007 his estate vineyard in the Rocks. Mm-hmm. And at the time, he was going to call the vineyard Savaya Estate Vineyard in the Rocks because that's the name of his winery and whatever. Yeah. And he offered us some grapes. And I'd always wanted to work with the Rocks because of Christoph. Yeah. And so we brought the fruit in. All I could think to myself was, instead of what would Jesus do, what would Christoph do? Because Christoph's very secretive. He does his own deal. He's an incredible winemaker and a great friend. But
Vineyard.
Thank you. But he will not divulge all the stuff that he does, and that's fine. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what would Christoph do? He's definitely native, not inoculated. He probably does some stem inclusion, and which at the time we had not played around with. And so that's how we made our first wine in '09. And I remember the fermentation. It smelled like raw prosciutto.
Awesome.
And I thought, this is definitely from the Rocks. I mean, you just smelled this and you knew it was going to turn into. Yeah. And so I guess the point of my story is that I never would have really wanted to work with the Rocks unless you had this inspiration based on a wine you tried from this particular area. The North Fork happened when another winemaker backed out at the last minute of this vineyard. Mm-hmm. And Kevin Pogue, who is our local geology nerd and amazing wine knowledge as well. He's like the geology vineyard guy up here. He's a professor at Whitman University. He told us about it, and we went and visited with the owners of the vineyard and signed a 20-year land lease on it because we had never tasted it. We had never tasted Christoph's wine off that site, and we had never tasted a wine from it. But it's one of those places you looked at it and you're like, that is going to be special.
Yeah.
There's no way it's not going to be special.
Yeah.
And we were, for sure we were right on that. Keith, our production winemaker I mentioned earlier, we're working with a vineyard. It's the highest elevated vineyard in Washington State. It's 3,000 feet elevation, and it has Riesling and Malbec planted. Keith made Riesling from it last year, and they did a Pet Nat Malbec. We'll soon know whether or not it really is going to be a good site for Malbec. It's very, very young vineyard. Some new vineyard management came in this year to kind of help out and get that thing up. But I do think in Washington, you're going to see people going higher elevation to kind of mitigate some of the heat, and also mitigate the freezes, the hard freezes. The hard freezes affect all the low-lying areas, and so that kind of see where we're going. But for us, it was just a matter of having worked with vineyards prior to starting the winery. I already had a knowledge of Walla Walla and Red Mountain, and it was much easier to either go plant or to, go establish relationships with the growers over there.
For sure. Yeah, I had that thought last year sometime when thinking about what would be the next step for Washington, and it's ultimately higher in elevation because of the diurnal shift. The higher you go, the colder it gets for the highs, and the warmer it gets for the lows. It takes that super, super hot day when it's 101 and 50, and it squashes it into 85 to 75. It's like, yeah, that sounds amazing.
Right.
But yeah, there's still, there has to be some studies done and work figured out on all that moving forward. But yeah, I see the potential there, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. There's not a lot of places you can go up higher. Here in Walla Walla, we have the Blue Mountains to our east, and there are plenty of areas to move in, and a lot. Chris Figgins with his estate vineyard, he's up Mill Creek and Upland Vineyard up there. Then he established that 15 years ago, and so that natural progression to move up there. Blue Mountain Vineyard, which is owned by Corliss. It's a cool site for Walla Walla. I won't start harvesting Merlot until the end of this month there. And I picked as late as end of November 9th. That's 2011 cold vintage. But November 9th we pulled Petit Bordeaux off of that vineyard. And so it's remarkable, the diversity just in our valley alone. Sure. Not even mentioning Washington State.
For sure, absolutely. So much to talk about, but yet so little time. Where do you see Sleight of Hand Cellars in 20 years?
Ooh, 20 years. Well, I really don't see us making that much more wine. We're at 10,000 cases. We've maxed out our production facility. It's a good number as far as sales, but it's also a good number as far as managing people, which neither Jerry or I really love doing. And so we've got a great staff. They're like family as opposed to employees. If anything, if we're going to invest in some more vineyard land, it's going to be in some really cool places, kind of like where the Ziggy Stardust block is. Yeah. We've actually looked at some property up there in the future. But as of right now, I'm going to keep on keeping on.
Solid. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a super busy guy. And
it's my pleasure, Anthony. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Do you have any parting thoughts or last words for us today?
No, I don't think so. If you guys have not visited Walla Walla, we'd love to have you up here. It's a little gem of a city in Southeast Washington State. 35,000 people, world-class restaurants, world-class wineries, and some great golf up here too, if you guys like to golf.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Trey, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I hope you are staying safe up there, and 2020 will keep you safe and well, and your loved ones safe and well.
We'll do our best. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome. So till then, keep it locked here. I will be chatting with Matt Ryan Van of Ryan Van Family Vineyards next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Until then, stay safe, drink well, and be
well. See you, buddy.
Cheers, brother.